Yes, and as a British person, British and European, I'd say I've got a several tiered identity. You know,
What?
my dad is English, my mum is Welsh, so I can only be British, and then have my sort of regional identity, and then European on top of that. I think being European to me means understanding what it means to be British. So I know that our language here is 40% Germanic, 40% French, Latin, 10% Greek, 10% other stuff. You know, to be British is to have a queen and a royal family who are descended from many different European countries. We have a national church, which not many of us actually follow anymore. But again, that's almost a perfect amalgamation of Catholicism and the German Lutheran churches. So basically, to be British is to be a mixture of lots of European things. And you can go back further and talk about the Saxons and the Vikings and the Roman Britons and all that kind of stuff. So a mixture of stuff, all the European influences has made Britain. Well, when I was 20, I moved to the Netherlands to study. So, I moved from Cheltenham to The Hague to go and study at Leiden University. And so that for me would be the formative moment of my European identity and experience. It wasn't really anything I'd never thought about the EU really, or being European before that. And then sort of looking back, I would say that I sort of thought about it at the time, but I knew that, I sort of thought it was interesting that as a 20-year-old, I was going to Europe to study. Whereas if I'd been born 70 years earlier or 90 years earlier, and all the years before that, I would probably have been going to Europe on a troop carrier of some form and going to war. But instead, I was going to go and study in the Netherlands with Dutch students, French students, Spanish students, Italians, and Germans, and so on. So that to me was the defining moment as a 20-year-old of my vision of Europe. Well, definitely Brexit. Terrible, terrible day, terrible evening, terrible morning, terrible 4 years afterwards. Well, we haven't really recovered from it since. I mean, I was at the time, so I'd just finished my bachelor's degree, and I got very involved with the campaign to remain in the European Union. I joined the Liberal Democrats and was campaigning for Remain, mostly to try and preserve the same freedom that I'd had to go and study abroad for my younger brothers and siblings and sisters. I've got 6 younger siblings, and I just thought it was sort of morally right that I do something to try and make sure that they have the same freedom that I enjoyed. And yet, 5 years later, here we are, and they won't. I've got a couple of brothers who are still in school, and if they want to go and study in the Netherlands, then they'll have to jump through lots more administration. They don't have the automatic right to go and study there, and they'd have to pay 11,000 euros, whereas my degree only cost me 1,700 euros a year, which was something I could afford. Whereas I don't think they'd be able to afford that now, so they'll be stuck in the UK. Which isn't a bad thing, but it's an experience that's been taken away from them. So I studied at Leiden University, but I did an Erasmus semester in Mannheim in Germany, and I made loads of friends there from all over Europe. And afterwards I went and visited some of them. I remember going to I had loads of experiences I remember quite vividly, one of which was going to Spain to go and stay with a friend in Barcelona. And her dad, interestingly, didn't speak any English at all. He only spoke French. And he sort of said to me, when he was growing up, when he was the same age as me, he wasn't allowed to leave Spain. And I could just see how proud he was to have a daughter who had friends from all over Europe, and could speak English really well. And that was a really big thing for him. And I've had loads of other experiences, individual experiences, I would say, that have made my time pretty special. I remember being on a train in Germany when I was studying in Mannheim, and I went to go and visit a place called Rastatt. And I was on a train with a very, very elderly gentleman. I would say he was in his mid-90s. And we started talking, and he was asking me what I was doing in Germany, and this was in German. And I said, I'm studying history, find history really interesting. And he just briefly mentioned that he'd been in World War II, and he'd been a soldier, age 15 or 16. And then I asked him another question, and he said, you'll get nothing more from me. You'll find out what we want to know, but not from me. And he walked off. And I mean, now he's probably not alive anymore. So if I hadn't been on that train at that time, I'd never have had that interaction with the past. So loads of individual interactions like that, I'd say. And then if you want to be more general, I'd say the survival of the European Union after the financial crisis of 2008. I remember the news when I moved to the Netherlands in 2012. It was still very much, the aftermath of the Euro crisis, and Draghi coming out and saying, we will do whatever it takes to keep the European Union alive. So just the very deep resilience that was shown at that time was quite impressive. One thing I like learning languages, and this was something I was thinking about when you popped up and asked me the question, what does Europe mean to you? I then went and did a master's as well. And whenever I want to go and learn a new language in Europe, I just go to church. Like wherever it is that I've been, I've always gone to the church, because you're learning from it's the same book, right? And it's a really easy way to learn a language, is just go wherever the church is. Because it's the same book. You practice singing, talking, listening, reading, all those kind of things. And then you really start to understand that that's basically what Europe is, that it's a very, very old union that actually goes back centuries, not just 60, 70 years. It's a very, 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 very deep-rooted cultural institution that you can still sort of see in the remnants of the churches that we've got across Europe at the moment. That might sound like total nonsense.
No, actually, that's a great tip that I'll definitely follow. I also like languages, and that's a good way to tap into them for sure.
It's free language tutorial.
Yeah, and I'm also I find it very interesting to experience. I'm not religious, but it's interesting to look at how the same book is taught in different ways in different countries. So it's not just the difference between Protestants and Catholics. It's also and Anglicans. It's also I don't know. There's certain details that are different in Portugal and Italy, for instance, that are more religious than other countries. So that's that's a cool tip. Thank you.
Well, there's just a lot to recognize, particularly I'm a Catholic, right? So that you can go and attend Catholic services across all of Europe, and it's the same. So wherever you are in Europe, you can go in and find something familiar. Not that I've attended church regularly, but I went when I was a kid, when the school made me go, and I always thought that was very interesting. And I think it's a very uncomfortable truth for Europe, that is one of the things that ties Europe together. And also, it was there at the very founding of the European Union, right? I mean, the Treaty of Rome was signed in Rome and presided over by the Pope. It's one of those things that I don't think the sort of modern European political leaders are particularly comfortable with, this idea that their union is really, it's basically the Christian church, and so is the West, right? If you look at what the West is still in geopolitical terms, it's basically Christian countries.
Mm-hmm.
For me, by far, the Erasmus, survival of the EU is a nice thing, because I think the EU has laudable aims. I mean, it's brought peace to Europe, where there had been 3 wars in 70 years, and now all of the European Union is peaceful. But you go slightly to the east, and you're in Belarus or Ukraine, and if you go to the south, you're in Libya. So all of these places are war-stricken countries. So that's what the EU has delivered. But for me, on a personal level, of course, it's Erasmus, because I made friends from all over Europe. And not just Erasmus, it was the fact actually that I could go and study in The Hague as a European citizen, right? So I was already studying abroad, and then I did another study abroad within a study abroad to go and do Erasmus. And now I've got friends in almost every European capital. If I want to go somewhere, I can always find someone on Facebook who will tell me where I should go and eat. Even in Venice and Rome, um, I've got people that I've met through Erasmus, which I ended up doing twice as well, because I did a master's, which was from the European, which is obviously operated out of Oxford. And that was, we did it again when I went to Paris. And again, just ended up in another circle of European people who were keen to become friends. So that's probably the Bologna Treaty, which nobody has probably ever said, ever. So the harmonization of higher university degrees, right? Because I mean, for example, before that, most Dutch degrees were 5 years. The equivalent of a bachelor's degree in the Netherlands would have been a 5-year degree. And nobody in the UK does a 5-year degree. Well, medical students might, but it's not common. So if that hadn't happened, I doubt I'd actually have gone to the Netherlands to study, because I wouldn't have done a 5-year degree. I'd have just said, no, that's some weird continental thing. But the fact that it was turned into a 3 years degree made it much more accessible and understandable. So there's that. And then, obviously the opportunity to live, study and work across the EU. Because when I graduated from my master's degree, I moved to Belgium to work for a year and a half. So again, that was another freedom that's been given to me by our previous membership of the European Union, that has been a very important part of my life, because I was actually able to go and embark on a career in data privacy that I would never have been able to actually make happen here, because I moved to Brussels, and there were consultancies and companies there who wanted to employ native English speakers. Whereas here, people would have looked at my CV and said, no, this guy hasn't got the right skills. But because I was in another country, I did. And obviously, it's always possible to go and live in another country. But the fact that the EU is accessible and proximate meant that it's much more doable than relocating to Shanghai or Johannesburg or something. Mm-hmm. To continue to promote exchange programs among young people, particularly, I would actually do it earlier than 18. Than 18 to 21. I think I was wondering if you could actually do it as an A-level student, right, but somewhere between the age of 11 to 18. Because generally, I find that as soon as you go in, there's a phrase, you opened with a phrase, so I can use a phrase as well, right? Which is that he who understands one country knows none. And there was so much about my own country that I didn't really appreciate until I moved to another one, until I moved to the Netherlands, right? And then when I moved to Germany and I had another country to compare my own to, that's really when I started to understand my own country better. Because you move abroad and you think, well, why do we do that? Why in the UK do we have this really rigid social order? It's really vertical, whereas in the Netherlands, everything seems really horizontal. And the earlier you start to see those changes, I think the better and the easier you pick things up. So I would say that one. More opportunities for educational exchanges. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then if I could do it, I will sort of have a second one, and this is genuine, which is actually more opportunities for greater harmonization of the single market for financial services. So this used to really, really annoy me, in that when I was living in Belgium, I still had a Dutch bank account, and it was an ING bank account. And ING have offices in Belgium and Luxembourg and the Netherlands and many other countries, but they didn't talk to each other. And this just used to really, really annoy me. The fact that I had to basically set up another ING bank account when I was living in Belgium, despite having an ING bank account in the same language in a country that was about 50 miles away. So I just thought that was nuts. I'm going to go for deeper integration of financial. No, I'm not. Erasmus, definitely. I actually think quite strongly about this. The second one that I mentioned, if you actually really want to make the EU work, that is vital, because at the moment it doesn't really happen. The services, the actual free market for services. And so, for example, for me, I worked in Belgium for a year and a half, right? So I built up a year and a half of pensions rights in Belgium that I've now lost, you know. And if you actually really want to make free movement work, then people, there have to be, you have to remove the disincentives from actually moving from one country to another. So when I was in the Netherlands, I built up 3 years of Dutch pension rights. But then every year that you're outside of the Netherlands, you actually lose a year of pension rights that you built up. So basically, I spent 5 years in other European countries and gained no pension rights for that time. And obviously, if I just stayed in my own country, I'd have 5 extra years of sort of pension contributions. So it's one of those, I know it's really technocratic and functional, but it's actually quite a big one. And because there's just no way to carry those things over at the moment, because pensions is solely a national power. But if you want to encourage people to move around all the time, then you've got to make some of the social benefits that they earn mobile as well. Yeah, I mean, they've got to, well, not subsidize it, but you can incentivize it. I mean, the fact that you get paid to do Erasmus, well, you don't get paid to do it, but you get given a grant to offset the cost of moving. That's vital, and so that's the kind of thing they need to do more of. So, for example, when I did my masters, the European, I moved across 3 countries in 1 year, and it sounds small, but that means you have to register at 3 doctors. You have to buy 3 sets of pots and pans. You have to pay for your transport from one place to the next. And so if you're going to really encourage people to take up more schemes like that, then you've got to increase the financial incentives for people to do so, to make it easier for them. Because one of the accusations against Erasmus in the UK, if you mention that's one of the things we've lost, well, people say, well, it's a really middle class thing. This is only something that you middle class people are going to lose. Whereas in fact, it's going to be the working class people, lower income people who'll be most negatively affected, because they've got no chance of being able to afford it then, if you remove all of those things. Whereas somebody who's got semi-wealthy parents might still be able to get their education paid for in the Netherlands if they want. So I would really say it's a financial thing, because if students go, well, I can go and do that and be better off, then it makes emotional sense and it makes rational sense.